What's going on YouTube? It's Teej back again with another video, and today we're talking about the Cleveland Browns in our season preview series. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well. And of course, most importantly, tell me what you think about the Cleveland Browns down below in the comment section. We now have the clarity of a 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson. What do you think this team comes away with in regards to wins next season? Who are some X factors, and what are some games you're looking forward to watching this team play? Love to have your thoughts down below in the comment section. So I did, just like with the Carolina Panthers, due to updates and circumstances, I have updated my win range and my projected win total from my AFC North regular season prediction video. So with that being said, I'll walk you through this as we move along. If you're new to the channel in this series, but 9 to 12 wins, I have them at 10 wins. Originally was an 11-win team. I flipped 2 wins that they had in the first 6 games to losses, and then ultimately gave them a Week 18 win against the Steelers. So still split against the Steelers in my eyes, with them losing the game where they won't have Deshaun Watson. And then one of the other games they end up losing is to, I think, the Chargers in Week 5. But we'll kind of go back over that once we get to that video and we do one final record prediction. But I still think, I think this is a roster that's good enough to weather the storm for 6 weeks. I think that is probably a little generous in my opinion, but we're going to leave that aside from this point onward. But once this team gets to Deshaun Watson, it's as legit as it gets, right? Maybe they're missing, another wide receiver on the outside. You always have question marks about, corner health and, secondary depth. That's just something you're going to have to think about with every team. But, all in all, one of the best rosters in football. So 10 wins, even without Watson for 6, I think is totally plausible. You look at Watson, that's obviously when he's on the field, off the field stuff aside, an elite quarterback, top 5 talent. And, Jacoby Brissett, more than capable backup, started plenty of games in his career. The running back situation, we'll see what they do with Kareem Hunt. If they do move on from him, 1-2 punch is still looking really good with Nick Chubb, Dearness Johnson. If they move on from Johnson, and it's, Chubb and Hunt, that works out well too. So no matter what, they have a solid stable of running backs. The offensive line, we're going to talk about Jedrick Wills later, but really solid unit. You do lose J.C. Tretter, so I'm interested to see what happens in that center position. But still, it's an offensive line that's a big part of this team's identity. The wide receivers, big Amari Cooper guy. I love wide receivers with that natural route running ability, and Amari Cooper is certainly that. Can win at all 3 levels. At the time, it was like, okay, well, Dallas is trying to shed, $20 million off the salary cap. Browns get him for a 5th-round pick, and that happens right as the wide receiver market explodes. So, Amari Cooper, great addition. And then you look at him at $20 million, and it's like, well, that's actually a pretty good value given that talent and, what receivers are being paid nowadays. So, big-time win there for the Cleveland Browns. Now, we'll talk about Donovan Peoples-Jones later, and, I have my questions about, Mitchell Schwartz and Jakeem Grant's there now. So, who else outside of Amari Cooper can be a more than dependable option? I have some question marks there, and that's why we'll talk about Donovan Peoples-Jones later on. Switch sides, Myles Garrett might be the most dominant edge rusher in football, depending on who you talk to. Him and TJ Watt both being in the same division is unbelievable. And they've done their fair share of work to put talent on the other side, right? A swap of Mack Wilson and Chase Winovich. I think Chase Winovich, now in a system where he's not having to do everything Bill Belichick asks of an edge player, he can just solely focus on getting the quarterback. Plus, he's playing behind Jadeveon Clowney, who will get the fair share and the majority of those snaps as a starting edge rusher opposite of Garrett. But also, you drafted Alex Wright. I think they got a good value there. That's a solid addition. They've always tried to, figure out what that interior is going to look like. It's never been an overly impressive unit, but they've gotten the job done without a superstar there. So I continue to see that being the case. I'm glad they brought back Anthony Walker, excuse me. I think he played pretty well last year and felt like a solid fit as that Mike linebacker. And then you have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who is, when he's healthy, an absolute freak, can do so many different things. He'd be an overhanging linebacker, playing the slot. So good when it comes to stopping the run, despite his size, just in the natural ability to shoot gaps and do moves like lightning. So yeah, obviously a stellar 2nd-round pick. They got him with a little bit of a fortunate, break there for Cleveland, given, late medical concerns that really kind of became irrelevant, or so we perceive now. And then moving on to the secondary, you paid Denzel Ward, that's CB1, and then, Greedy Williams had a career year last year. Greg Newsome also looked good, 1st-round pick out of Northwestern. So they got a nice little trio of guys that can play on the outside. We'll see what they end up doing with that nickel spot after moving on from Troy Hill. So that's a little interesting. But those 3 as your boundary corner, feeling really good about that. And we'll talk about the safety position later, but just name value, John Johnson III, Grant Delpit, who I loved coming to LSU, and Ronnie Harrison Jr., who was having a solid start to his year in Jacksonville before the Browns kind of got him for peanuts. So Love that group on paper. Now they're just going to need to take a step forward. So realistic goal, this is an easy one. It's self-explanatory. Reach goal, it's kind of like the college that maybe it was a little outside of your true requirements of what you've done, and maybe that reach job, you don't have the full qualifications and you don't meet all the requirements for it, but you still send the application. That's kind of the principle in theory here. So realistic goal, obviously reach the playoffs. I think this team can totally do that, and if not for the Deshaun Watson suspension, it'd feel like kind of a layup given the rest of the roster and an elite quarterback. And then reach goal, win the AFC North and win the Super Bowl. That made it sound repetitive, and that's because it's the exact same thing I had for the Cincinnati Bengals, so literally didn't have to change anything on the graphic template. But realistically, again, there's probably two handfuls of teams in the league where I think they could win a Super Bowl, and it wouldn't shock me. And, despite what I think about Deshaun Watson maybe as a person and some of the holes on the roster, and it's not absolutely perfect, but Kevin Stefanski has proven to be a very solid head coach and a play caller. And then you get to the talent on the field, and it's a well-balanced roster with a true disruptor in Myles Garrett, a true game wrecker, an elite quarterback, an awesome wide receiver who can get open on his own, fantastic offensive line, great running backs, some tight end talent. We didn't even talk about that earlier, but obviously bringing back David Njoku, there's still some talent to work with there. And then, even the rest of the defense beyond Garrett, there's talent scattered at all three levels. So this roster, the quarterback situation, the coaching staff, it all kind of points to the direction of this team is truly a Super Bowl contender. So, of course, that should be their reach goal. Now, moving on to some X factors here. So these are not superstars. Like, once Deshaun Watson's out there, you should expect good play. Denzel Ward got paid for a good reason. Myles Garrett is on the thumbnail for a reason. They're not X factors. They should just do their job. They should be superstars. X factors in my eyes are guys who 50-50. They could exceed expectations, they could fall short, and that will be the difference between the Browns winning a Super Bowl and maybe missing the playoffs or something like that, where, a loaded AFC, maybe they're that last team looking in, or maybe they're just the 7th seed and have a long road ahead of them. So that's what I'm going for when I talk about these X factors. And Donovan Peoples-Jones was kind of the first one that came to mind. Really solid field stretching, big body guy, runs in the 4.48 back in his combine. So has the downfield speed, and it always feels like those big guys, 6'2", 6'3 plus, 200 plus pounds, they feel like they carry that speed, a little bit better when they have the pads on versus maybe someone who's like 5'8", 165, 170, then you put the pads on, maybe they lose a step. That's just how I feel about it when I look at and watch football, so that's totally subjective. But Donovan Peoples-Jones gives you that vertical ability, and you think of that as a compliment opposite of Amari Cooper. It's like, okay, well, Cooper's always been this possession running archetype and maestro, and he can work in that 10 to 20 yard range, work between the hashes because of that skill set. And you could use Donovan Peoples-Jones as this guy to go down the field, force safeties to play honest and open up that intermediate part of the field for an Amari Cooper, or they creep up too far. That speed, that size, he can win at the catch point. There's a lot of things you can do with Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, my hesitation, that sounds great, but him as a wide receiver too. It sounds, I think of Donovan Peoples-Jones in a lot of ways of how I feel about Marquez Valdes-Scantling, where it's like, if that's all you're asking them to do, I feel pretty good about that. And a specialist, you could call him a number 2, but let's take Green Bay last year. Davante Adams was the guy. They used Alan Lazard for things, and they used MVS for different things. And those two kind of created a number 2 wide receiver. Now, granted, that still obviously wasn't enough for Green Bay. But in theory, with Cleveland, it feels like, okay, maybe with Jakeem Grant, he can be the yak guy, and then Donovan Peoples-Jones is the tall vertical wide receiver. Okay, that kind of works in theory. I can get behind that, but we saw how it played out for Green Bay, and I just don't know entirely if Donovan Peoples-Jones is up for the task of being that number 2 wide receiver for a team that's trying to get to the Super Bowl. We will find out, obviously, but there's something to like, but there's also some reason for some hesitation there, and that's why I have to put him on the X factors. And then Jedrick Wills Jr., he's been solid, low 60s Pro Football Focus grade, but he was always somebody who it kind of felt like it was going to take a little bit of time. He comes from Alabama, so you feel good about eventually him being able to take that leap. And sometimes with tackles, this 3-year window is it can in a lot of ways be when you see that player break out, tackles, corners, and a couple other positions. It feels like you need a couple years in the biz to fully get antiquated in the system, your role, and the speed of the game, how strong you need to be, all that fun stuff. I think this could be the year where Jedrick Wills takes a step forward, and especially you talk about you losing a J.C. Treader and you lose some talent there in the middle of the offensive line. Where can you gain some of that back? I think Jedrick Wills, with a step forward, could easily become a guy who goes from a low 60s grade to maybe an 80 grade type of tackle using Pro Football Focus in their grading system. So I totally think that's within the cards here. And if he does take that step forward, it kind of balances out maybe what you lost there at the center position. And, maybe that's not that big of a loss. Maybe Tretter proves to be not that big of a hit against this Browns offense, and then Jedrick Wills takes that step forward. Okay, now you're talking about something special across the O-line. But if he continues to be that 60 grade player, the hole at center, that kind of starts to chip away at one of the big strengths of this Cleveland Browns team. So again, a perfect reason why to have him on the X Factors. And then John Johnson III. So name power, you look at that and you're like, this guy is a star. And they paid him as such. They got a good deal, or about $13.3 million APY. But that being said, last year was his lowest graded, again, going back to Pro Football Focus grades, it was his second lowest grade in his career, obviously the lowest that he's had in Cleveland. So pretty big step back from where he was when the Rams, and then kind of what Cleveland was signing him and their expectations were to be. And specifically when you look at Ronnie Harrison and Grant Delpit, and I'm a huge Grant Delpit guy. I really hope he puts it together in year 3. Obviously missed his entire true rookie year with preseason training camp ACL injury. That being said, him and Ronnie Harrison are probably better fit as strong safeties playing in the box. And that kind of leaves John Johnson III as the one lone player who can also play in the box, but the one lone guy who has the skill set to be a deep safety and a true impact player in coverage. So because of that, since he's the one guy who has that skill set versus the other two, I'm not entirely convinced, that's a big role. And especially when you talk about a solid cornerback room, but what if injuries come to arise? And, the task for John Johnson III gets that much more difficult. But if he takes a step back, it takes away, a little bit of a hiccup from the defense last year, which was still good. It was still a good defense. But if he gets back on track, then you look at that secondary, as long as it stays healthy. You talk about Denzel Ward, you talk about him, you talk about Greedy Williams, you talk about Greg Newsome. There's a whole lot of talent going left and right. And then, of course, again, I'm a big Grant Delpit guy, like Ronnie Harrison Jr. Or Ronnie Harrison Sr. No, Jr. Yeah. There's a lot to like there in the secondary, all that to say. But it's going to take John Johnson III get back to where he was at the end of his tenure in LA. So, interesting X Factor. I don't normally like putting household names or somebody who is widely considered, I think, by NFL fans as a star-level type of player. But last year was a little bit of a dip in his production. He's going to get back on track. Moving on to games to watch. So there was one game I decided to put on here that wasn't a Deshaun Watson game, or a game that's going to be played without Deshaun Watson that first 6-week period. And I decided to make it week 2 against the Jets. So Cleveland against Carolina, that was kind of the honorable mention. That's week 1. Obviously, a revenge game for Baker Mayfield. That could play out to be a fascinating one, and that could be maybe a potential upset game for the Panthers. I think Baker's a sizable step up from Sam Darnold. There's some young talent in the wide receiver room, and that defense is interesting. And Phil Snow's a great DC, and maybe Baker gets his revenge. And if that's the case, week 2 against the Jets has got to be a W with Jacoby Brissett. And that's the huge caveat. You have to think about this through the lens of a team starting Jacoby Brissett, not a team that I was saying earlier could contend for a Super Bowl. Because then otherwise you'd look at the Jets and say, well, that's an easy dub. But thinking about it through the lens of a Jacoby Brissett-led team, week 1 could be interesting. Yeah, I could see that being a close win, or maybe the Panthers pull off the upset, and that puts that much more onus on, okay, we got to come away with a win at home against the Jets, which, by the way, a vastly improved roster than where it was last year, and you're hoping to see that quarterback take a step forward in year 2. So, Jacoby Brissett could find himself in a position where maybe they get upset week 1 by the Panthers, and maybe the Jets are a sleeper team and kind of hitting their stride and steal one away from the Browns. And it's just a fascinating situation. How many losses can you afford in that first 6-week period without Deshaun Watson and still be in the playoff window? How long can how big of a hole can you dig yourself and still be in the hunt? So I am very fascinated by the first 6-week period. I could have loaded up this games to watch segment with nothing but games there, but I didn't want to do that. But I did give myself one. And it's that Jets game because the Jets could be on the rise. And, with Jacoby Brissett and this Cleveland Browns team, maybe they're on upset watch there in week 2. But honorable mention to week 1 against Carolina, revenge game for Baker. That also could fall into that category. Fast forwarding, also want to make note real quick, no AFC North games here because division games are obviously games to watch. So just want to get that clear. Week 10 at the Miami Dolphins. And, obviously now you're talking about Deshaun Watson being under center, but depending on how big of a hole you dig for yourself and maybe a hot start from Baltimore, who was my pick to win the AFC North, or, maybe the Bengals are looking like they're going to repeat. You might be talking about the Browns and the Dolphins fighting for wild card seeding. So, of course, playoff implications make that game very important. In Miami, that's a team with some talent on the defense. So how does, Deshaun Watson, what is that, especially that cornerback position in Miami, maybe the biggest strength they have on that roster, you only have Amari Cooper. That's going to be a game where Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to have to show up. Mitch Schwartz is going to have to make a play. Jakeem Grant, somebody. David Bell, also a wide receiver I haven't really mentioned, could fill in that Jarvis Landry roles, that not uber athletic slot third target. I think he could fill that role. A bit of a different body archetype, but I think he could still play that. Somebody's got to make a play outside of Amari Cooper, because it's going to be tough sledding working against either Byron Jones or Xavier Howard, presumably Xavier Howard. So this is going to be a game where one of those wide receivers is going to have to step up, not named Amari Cooper. So very fascinating there, but also a game with a ton of seeding implications. So then you fast forward to Week 12, and this is maybe not so much wild card implications, but maybe the Browns are fine with Brissett, and they're fighting for 1 through 4 seeding with the Buffalo Bills. So that's an interesting one. But this is also just, at this point, we're talking about Deshaun Watson. This will be his 6th game back. Talk about the Bills trying to get on the right track and make sure they're playing their best brand of football for the playoffs. Browns too. So this is a very early playoff type of game. I'm not guaranteeing it's going to feel like a playoff game, but Week 12 is where you're going to start seeing teams really turn it on, really turn their focus to the postseason and make sure you're playing your best brand of football. So the rust is off, and I want to see the best of the Browns against the best of the Bills and throw away every other outside context. That is a awesome game. Just when you look at the rosters, look at the talent at quarterback, the talent of those coaching staffs, best of the Browns, best of the Bills. If we get it, that game could be fantastic. Furthermore, going on the road again, it's tough to play in Buffalo. How does Cleveland handle that challenge? And especially later and later in the year when the weather gets a little bit more gross, how do you handle playing in Buffalo? Because the weather could certainly throw you a couple of curveballs there in Buffalo. So that is going to do it for my Cleveland Browns season preview video. Let me hear what you think about the Browns down below in the comments section. I responded to just about every comment, so give me a win prediction. Give me some X factors, not superstars, please, but X factors, and some games you're looking forward to watching this team play. Love to have your thoughts, and tell me what you think about this Deshaun Watson situation. Maybe let's please keep it civil down below. Let's maybe keep it football focused, but how big of a step forward and a step up is that from Baker Mayfield? Love to have your thoughts. Let's talk about the Browns down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new around here, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. We're making our climb to 1,000 subscribers. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.